The night was cold, darker than usual, and the human sat alone in his small shelter at the edge of the alien settlement. The wind outside howled like a lonely creature, pressing against the thin walls of his home. He had just finished his meager meal, hoping to fall asleep soon, when a sound broke the silence. It was a knock, soft at first, almost like the tapping of a branch against the door. He froze, his spoon still in hand. Who would come at this hour, in the middle of such a cruel night? No one ever visited him. The aliens of the village barely spoke to him. They called him outsider. They mocked him for being different. The knock came again, this time louder, more desperate. The human's heart began to beat faster. Fear whispered in his mind. What if it was a trap? What if the villagers had decided to punish him for staying here? He had learned that their cruelty often came without warning. Still, something about the sound felt different. There was no anger in it, only need. Slowly, carefully, he stood and walked to the door. His hand hovered over the handle. He listened. Silence, only the wind. For a moment he thought he had imagined it, but then he heard it again, a weak, trembling voice, muffled by the wood. Please, open, please. His breath caught. It was not a man's voice. It was soft, melodic, yet heavy with sorrow. He hesitated, his mind fighting with his heart. The safe choice was to ignore it, to stay inside, but the human was not the kind who could ignore a plea. Not when it sounded like someone's last hope. With a deep breath, he pulled the door open. At first, all he saw was the storm, the swirling snow and the shadows of the night. But then she stepped forward, an alien woman, tall and graceful, though her body shook from the cold. Her clothes were torn, her skin pale with exhaustion. Behind her, two small figures clung to her legs. Children. Wide frightened eyes. The human stared, shocked. He knew her face. She was the widow from the village. He had seen her once at the market, always walking quickly, head lowered, avoiding others. Rumors said her husband had died in the last border war, leaving her to raise her young ones alone. He also remembered the way others treated her, mocking, spitting, pushing her away, as if her misfortune made her unclean. Now she stood at his door, snow in her hair, tears frozen on her cheeks. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak. Her voice broke with both shame and desperation. My children, they need a father. I will warm your bed, human, but please, please do not turn us away. The word struck him like a blade. He had expected a request for food, maybe shelter for a night, but this was more than a plea for help. It was an offering born from despair. He looked at the children, thin and shivering, clutching their mother's legs. Their eyes begged silently. The human felt the weight of the moment. Outside, the storm raged, cruel and uncaring. Inside, his fire still burned. He could close the door, pretend he had seen nothing, let them vanish into the night, or he could open his home, and his life, to a path full of danger. The widow lowered her head, ashamed of her words, as if expecting him to laugh or curse, but he did neither. He only stood frozen, his hand tight on the door, his mind spinning. The knock at midnight had not just disturbed his rest, it had brought a choice that could change everything. The human's hand trembled on the door as he stared at the figure before him. The storm pushed against her thin body, almost carrying her away, but still she stood, holding her children close, her eyes lifted slowly, glowing faintly in the darkness, not with power, but with pain. The human had seen many aliens in this settlement, but there was something different about her. She was beautiful in a way that felt fragile, her skin marked with faint silver lines that shimmered under the moonlight. Yet her face carried deep sorrow, the kind no one could hide. The two children pressed against her were small, their clothes ragged, their little hands trembling as they clutched their mother's legs. For a long moment, no words came from him. He only stared, trying to understand why she had come to his door, why she would say such desperate words. The widow took a step forward, her voice weak but steady. I know what I asked sounds shameful, human, but I have nothing left. My people cast me out. They whisper that I bring bad luck. They say I am cursed because my husband died. The children's eyes lifted to the human, wide and pleading. He felt something stir inside him, something he had tried to bury ever since he came to this strange world. He had lost much himself, family, home, everything he once called his, and now, staring at this broken family, he felt that same loneliness reflected in their faces. You should not be here, he said at last, his voice rough. The storm whistled. Behind her, shaking the door as if to remind him of the danger. If the villagers know you came to me, they will punish you, they already despise me, they will use this to hurt you more. Her lips curved in a bitter smile, a smile of someone who had already lost too much to care. They already hurt me, human, every day, they spit when I pass, they throw stones when my children ask for food, tonight. They told me to leave the village, to die in the snow. Her voice broke, her body shivering as her children clung tighter. I had nowhere else to go, so I came to you. The human's chest tightened. He looked past her at the storm, the endless white swallowing the path behind her. If he sent them away, the snow would take them. He knew it, she knew it, the children knew it. That was why they clung to her with such fear. As if letting go meant the end, one of the little ones, a girl with soft silver hair like her mother, whispered in a trembling voice, "Please, mister, don't make us go back. We're cold." The words were small, but they cut deeper than any weapon. The widow lowered her head, her pride shattered. She had once been respected, a wife, a mother of promise. Now she begged at a human's door, offering herself for the sake of her children. "I will cook, I will clean, I will warm your bed, whatever you ask," she whispered, shame flooding her tone. "Just let my children live." The human's hand gripped the door harder, his heart thundered. He knew the weight of this choice. If he let them in, his quiet life would end, he would be marked forever by their struggle. But if he shut the door, he would never sleep again. Haunted by the cries of children, he turned away. He stepped aside slowly, his voice low. "Come inside." The widow's eyes widened, disbelief flashing across her face. For a second, she thought she had misheard, but when she looked into his eyes, she saw no lies, only tired honesty. She stepped forward, guiding her children into the warmth. The firelight inside touched their faces, chasing away the frost. The children gasped softly, their little hands reaching toward the glow. Their cheeks pinkened, their shivers slowed. The widow lingered at the doorway, her eyes meeting his once more. There was gratitude there, but also fear, fear of what this choice would mean for both of them, fear of the judgment that would follow. Still, for the first time in a long while, there was also hope. As the door shut behind her, the storm outside raged louder, but within those walls, something had begun, a fragile thread connecting two broken souls, one human, one alien, and the children caught between. The fire crackled softly in the small shelter, throwing long shadows on the walls. The human sat silently, watching the widow and her children warm themselves near the flames. The little ones huddled close together, their tiny hands stretched toward the glow, their faces, once pale with cold, now softened with a faint trace of color. The widow sat apart, her body stiff, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She looked around the humble room with cautious eyes, as if expecting to be thrown out at any moment. Her lips trembled as though she wanted to speak but could not find the courage. The human poured hot water into a cup and pushed it toward her. "Drink," he said simply. His voice was rough but not unkind. She looked at the cup, then at him. Her silver-marked fingers brushed the rim before she lifted it carefully. Sipping slowly, a tear slipped down her cheek, though she tried to hide it. Minutes passed in heavy silence. Finally, the widow lifted her gaze. Her eyes glowed faintly in the firelight, filled with both desperation and shame. "You must think poorly of me," she whispered. "I came to your door in the night, offering myself like some worthless thing." The human frowned, his jaw tightening. He did not answer, but his silence only pushed her to continue. Her voice trembled as she spoke again. "I meant every word, human. My children need a father, they need someone strong, someone who can protect them. If you take us in, I will give myself to you, I will warm your bed." The words hung heavy in the room, the human's heart pounded. He had expected begging, maybe a plea for food, but this was different. It was not just a mother seeking shelter, it was a broken woman offering the last piece of herself for the sake of her children. His eyes shifted to the little ones. The boy had fallen asleep with his head against his sister's shoulder. Their breaths were soft, their bodies small and fragile. For them, she was willing to sacrifice everything. The human finally spoke, his tone low. "Why me?" The widow blinked, confused. "What do you mean, why come to me?" he asked, his voice edged with suspicion. "The villagers hate me as much as they hate you, maybe more. You could have gone anywhere else. Why risk knocking at my door?" her lips trembled, she lowered her eyes. Because you are not like them, I have seen it, you do not laugh when they mock me, you do not throw stones at my children, you walk with your head down, yes, but your eyes are kind, her voice broke, a sob escaping, and kindness is all I have left to gamble on. The human's chest tightened, he looked away, trying to steady himself. His life had been lonely, filled with silence and suspicion, now. With her words, a weight pressed against him, a choice he had not asked for, but could not ignore. The widow placed the empty cup on the floor, her hands shook, she leaned forward slightly, her voice barely above a whisper, take me if you must, human, treat me as you wish, but please, let my children stay alive, they are innocent, they do not deserve the cold, the hunger, the cruelty of our people. Her words hit him harder than the storm outside, the fire popped, sending sparks into the air. The human stared at her, struggling with emotions he had long buried, anger, sorrow, compassion, loneliness. They twisted inside him like a storm of their own. For the first time since she had knocked on his door, the human saw her not just as a widow, not just as an alien, but as a mother on the edge of despair. And though her plea was shocking, though her offer shamed her, he understood the truth behind it. She was not bargaining for comfort, she was fighting to keep her children alive. The widow's words lingered in the air long after she had spoken them. The human sat in silence, his hands tight against his knees, his eyes drifted between the weary mother and her sleeping children. The flames painted their faces in soft light, reminding him of something he had lost long ago, a family of his own. But outside those thin walls, the village waited, cruel and watching. The human knew too well how these people treated anyone who was weak or different. He had lived among them long enough to understand that mercy was not in their hearts. The widow lowered her eyes, her voice unsteady. You should know, human, I did not come to your door only because I had no choice. I came because they made sure I had no life left to cling to. My people, my own blood, turned against me. Her hands trembled as she clutched her cloak tighter around her thin body. When my husband died, they whispered that it was my fault, that I cursed him with my bad luck. They stopped bringing food, they stopped speaking my name. At first I thought it would pass, that they would remember the woman I once was, but it only grew worse. The human frowned, anger stirring in his chest. He had seen shadows of this cruelty before, whispers in the market, the way the children were shoved aside when they tried to stand in line. But hearing it from her lips cut deeper. They made me kneel in the dirt for scraps, she said, her voice breaking. When my children asked for bread, they laughed and gave them stones. They told them to eat dirt, they told me to beg, and when I begged, they spat at me. Still I endured, for my children. I thought I could survive their hatred, but tonight, they decided to end it. Her eyes lifted to his, glowing faintly with sorrow. They gathered outside my hut, they shouted that a widow had no place among them, that my children would only bring ruin. They pushed me, ruck me. One tore the roof from my hut and threw it into the snow. They told me to leave and never return. They wanted me to freeze out there, with my little ones. The human's jaw clenched, his heart burned with a slow, heavy rage. He had felt their cruelty too, though not as sharp as hers. They had called him beast, parasite, unworthy of trust. Yet for her and her children, the cruelty had been sharper, more merciless. The widow's voice softened, barely above a whisper. So I left, carrying them into the storm. I told myself I would find a place, but there was none, and when I thought I could walk no more, I saw the faint glow from your fire through the cracks of your walls. That is why I knocked, that is why I pleaded. The human leaned back slowly, his eyes fixed on the flames. He wanted to believe that her story was exaggerated, that no people could be so cruel to their own, but deep down, he knew it was true. He had seen enough to understand. The storm outside roared like a beast, shaking the walls. But inside, the shelter was filled with a different kind of storm, a storm of choices, of truths too painful to ignore. The human breathed heavily, his chest rising and falling with unspoken anger. The widow folded her hands, her shoulders sinking as if the weight of shame crushed her. I do not ask for pity, human, I only ask for life. If you cannot give us that, then I have already failed my children. The human looked at her, at the children sleeping soundly, their small bodies curled together for warmth. He felt the walls of his loneliness crack a little. The cruelty of the village had driven her here, but the cruelty of his own silence would decide whether they lived or died, and in that moment, he realized the choice was no longer about survival, it was about defying the cruelty that ruled this world. The human sat by the fire long after the widow had spoken, his thoughts twisted like the storm outside, every breath he took felt heavier, as if the air itself demanded an answer from him. The children slept peacefully now, curled on a blanket near the fire, their tiny chests rose and fell in gentle rhythm. The widow sat close to them, her back straight, her eyes on the flames, but though her face showed calm, her hands gave away her fear. They shook slightly, clenching the fabric of her cloak. As if it were the only thing keeping her together, the human rubbed his forehead. His life had been simple, not easy but simple: stay quiet, work, survive, avoid trouble. That was the rule he had followed since he arrived in this place. Yet tonight, that rule had cracked, and standing in its place was a choice far greater than himself. He looked at the widow, her earlier words echoed in his mind. I will warm your bed, human. My children need a father. The plea haunted him, not because of her offer, but because of the pain behind it. He knew she had lowered herself only because there was nothing left for her. It was not desire, it was desperation. If he let them stay, he would be marked. The villagers already hated him. Protecting her would give them reason to break him completely. He imagined the looks, the whispers, the stones that would surely come his way. They would call him a thief of widows, a corrupter of blood, an enemy of their kind. He had no illusions of kindness from them. But if he turned her away, if he sent her and the children back into the storm, what would he be then? Could he live with the cries of children freezing in the dark? Could he bear the image of her eyes, wide and begging at his door, haunting him night after night? His hand tightened into a fist, his heart pulled in two directions. Fear whispered one way, compassion pulled the other. The human had fought battles before, but this was different. This was a war inside his own chest. The widow's voice broke the silence, soft but steady. You are afraid. He glanced at her, surprised. Her eyes met his, glowing faintly in the firelight, not with anger, but with understanding. I can see it in your face. You think if you keep us, the village will come for you. You are not wrong. They will. They never forgive kindness. Her words cut deep, because they were true. He remained silent, and she sighed, lowering her gaze. If you send us away, I will not hate you, human. I will understand, but please, let my children rest one night without fear, one night with warmth. The human looked at her again. Her strength surprised him. Even after all she had suffered, she spoke not of herself, but only of her children. She did not beg for comfort, she begged for their lives. The fire popped, and the human leaned forward. His voice came out low, rough, but certain. If they come for you, they come for me too. The widow's lips parted, shock flickering across her face. She whispered, you would risk that? He nodded slowly, though doubt still clawed inside him. I cannot throw you into the storm. I cannot look at them. He pointed at the sleeping children, and tell them their lives are worth less than my safety. The widow's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. She bowed her head, her voice trembling. Then whatever burden comes, I will share it. You will not stand alone. The human leaned back, his heart pounding. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. He had made his choice, but in that choice, he felt something stir, something he thought long dead, a spark of purpose. The storm outside howled louder, yet inside the small shelter, warmth spread not only from the fire, but from the fragile bond now forming, a bond that would soon be tested by every cruelty waiting beyond those walls. The human rose from his seat and moved toward the door, pressing it firmly shut against the storm. The sound of the wind was harsh, but within the walls of the small shelter, a fragile calm began to grow. He placed more wood on the fire, watching as the flames leapt higher, spreading warmth across the room. The children stirred in their sleep, their small bodies curling deeper into the blanket. One of them let out a soft sigh, the kind that only comes when fear loosens its grip. The human's chest tightened as he watched them. They looked peaceful, but he knew that peace was borrowed, stolen from the storm only for a short while. The widow sat near the fire, her eyes lowered. She kept her hands folded as if she was afraid of reaching out too far. Her silver-lined skin glowed faintly in the light, but her face carried exhaustion. She had walked through pain, humiliation, and endless cold to stand here now. Her silence was heavy, yet it spoke louder than words. The human broke it. his voice low. You can stay here for tonight. Tomorrow, we will decide what comes next. The widow looked up, her lips parting slightly. There was relief in her eyes, but also caution. You are kind, human, kinder than I deserve, she whispered, but you know what this means. If they find out, they will not forgive you. He gave a bitter smile. They never forgave me to begin with. His voice carried a weight that startled her. It was true. He had always been the outsider, the unwanted shadow among them. The villagers had only tolerated his presence because he kept to himself, but now, by letting her in, he had crossed a line that could never be erased. The firelight flickered between them, making the small shelter feel less like a prison and more like a refuge. For the first time that night, the widow's shoulders loosened. She placed her hand gently on the blanket covering her children, her fingers brushing their hair. They have not slept this soundly in weeks, she murmured. They were always afraid, even inside the village, afraid of stones, of hunger, of waking to find me gone. Her voice broke, and she quickly turned her face away. The human studied her carefully. He could see her pride battling with her pain. She had offered herself earlier not out of want, but out of fear of losing her children. He understood that now, and it weighed heavy on him. He pushed a small bowl of food toward her. Eat, he said simply. She hesitated, then took it, her fingers trembling as she lifted the spoon. She ate slowly, quietly, savoring each bite as if it were the first real meal she had tasted in days. The human leaned back, listening to the storm pound against the walls. He thought about the villagers, about the cruel eyes that always watched him. If they learned she was here, trouble would come. But as he looked at the children, sleeping soundly beside their mother, he knew his choice had already been made. The danger was worth it. The widow finished her food and set the bowl down. She looked at him, her voice softer now. Why are you doing this, human? You owe me nothing, you owe my kind nothing, and yet here we are. He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. Because I know what it feels like to have nothing, and I know what it feels like to lose everything. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of old scars. Her eyes lingered on him, searching, but she did not ask more. Instead, she lowered her head, whispering, then tonight, you have saved us. The fire crackled, filling the silence. Outside, the storm raged, unseen and wild, but within those walls, a fragile bond began to weave tighter. The human did not say it aloud, but deep in his heart, he knew the truth. He had not only given them shelter in the dark, he had given himself something he had lost long ago, a reason to keep fighting. Morning came slowly, the storm easing into silence. The human opened his eyes to the sound of soft breathing. The widow and her children were still asleep, huddled near the fire. Their faces looked calm, touched by warmth instead of fear. For a brief moment, the human allowed himself to believe that this tiny room was more than a shelter. It was a home. He stood and quietly prepared food, crushing dried grain into a thin porridge. The smell woke the children first. The little girl rubbed her eyes and tugged at her brother, whispering with a small smile. Soon both sat upright, their eyes brightening when they saw the bowls. The human handed them their share, watching as they ate eagerly but carefully, as if afraid the food would vanish if they took too much. His chest tightened at the sight. He had once eaten like that too, when survival meant never trusting the next meal to come. The widow ate in silence, her silver-lined skin glowing softly in the daylight streaming through a crack in the wall. She glanced at the human now and then, but her eyes quickly dropped each time. She carried both gratitude and unease, unsure what tomorrow would bring. As the day passed, the children wandered around the small shelter, exploring every corner. They touched the wooden tools, the old knife, the pile of wood stacked near the door. The human showed them how to sharpen a stick into a point, how to tie rope, small things he thought might distract them. To his surprise, their laughter filled the air, thin but genuine. The widow watched, her lips curving into the first true smile he had seen from her. For a moment, she looked younger, less broken, like a woman who once had a place in her world. Her eyes softened when she saw her children learning, laughing, breathing without fear. Later, when the children slept again, the widow spoke, her voice low. They like you, human, they true. Stu more quickly than I expected. The human shrugged, though her words touched him more than he let show. Children see the truth before adults do. They do not lie to themselves about what they feel. Her eyes lingered on him, thoughtful. And what about you? Do you trust us? He met her gaze, his expression steady. Trust is not given in a day, but you are here, and I will not betray that. The widow lowered her eyes, her fingers brushing her children's hair, her voice trembled with a mix of relief and guilt. I was ready to give myself away, to trade my body just so they would survive. But you have not taken what I offered. You gave us food and warmth instead. Why? The human looked at her for a long moment before answering. Because you are not a thing to be traded. You are a mother, and your children need you whole, not broken further. Her eyes widened, her lips parting slightly. No one had spoken to her that way since her husband died. No one had seen her as more than a burden or a curse. For the first time in years, she felt the weight on her shoulders lift just a little. That evening, the children insisted he sit with them by the fire. The little boy leaned against him, while the girl asked questions about the stars. The human answered in simple words, pointing at the small window in the roof, telling them how he once looked at the same stars from a faraway world. The widow sat quietly, her eyes shining in the glow. She saw how her children clung to him, how his rough voice soothed their fears, and though fear of the village still lurked in her heart, she felt something new grow beside it, a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, this bond could become something stronger. The days passed slowly. The storm outside faded, leaving the world wrapped in silence. Inside the small shelter, life had begun to change. The human found himself no longer waking to emptiness. Instead, he woke to the sound of children laughing, to the quiet hum of the widow as she prepared what little food they had. For the first time in years, his shelter felt alive. But peace never lasts long in a place built on cruelty. The villagers had sharp eyes, and sharper tongues. It did not take them long to notice the widow and her children had vanished from their ruined hut. Whispers spread quickly, twisting into venom. She must have gone to the human, they hissed. The cursed widow warms his bed now. The outsider shelters her like a thief in the night. By the fourth day, the human saw them, a group of villagers standing at the edge of the frozen path near his home, their shadows long against the snow, their voices carried in the cold air, harsh and accusing. He watched them from the doorway, his hand resting on the frame. The widow noticed too, her face turned pale, her breath quickened. She pulled her children close, her hands trembling as if the very sight of the villagers brought back every cruelty they had ever thrown at her. They know, she whispered, her voice breaking. They have come for us. The human said nothing at first, his jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as he studied the group. He recognized their leader, a broad-shouldered alien with scarred skin, one of the men who had always mocked him in the market. The man's eyes burned with hate as he shouted across the snow, "Human, come out, you dare to keep what does not belong to you, you dare to shelter the cursed widow, give her to us, give the children, or you will pay the price." The widow gasped, clutching her little ones tighter. Her daughter began to cry softly, hiding her face in her mother's cloak. The boy bit his lip, trying to be brave, but his eyes shone with terror. The human stepped forward, his voice steady though his heart raced. "She is not yours to give or take. She came to me, and she stays with me now." The villagers erupted in angry shouts, their voices mixing with the biting wind. Some hurled stones at the walls of his shelter, others cursed his name. The leader sneered, his words dripping with poison. "You think you can protect her? You are nothing here, outsider. You will die with her, and your bones will freeze beneath the snow." The widow turned to the human, her eyes wide with fear. "Please, they will kill you, they will kill us all." But he did not step back, his chest rose and fell with determination. The loneliness that once chained him had broken, in its place was something stronger, the will to protect. He glanced at the children, their small faces streaked with tears. He looked at the widow, her body trembling, and something fierce burned in him. "They will not touch you," he said firmly, "not while I draw breath." The villagers moved closer, their feet crunching in the snow. The leader raised his hand, signaling the others. Their shadows darkened the path, their anger heavy as the storm that once howled across the land. Inside the small shelter, the fire still burned, casting warmth against the cold, but outside, danger had returned. The peace they had found was about to shatter. The widow gripped the human's arm, her voice shaking. "If you fight them, you will die." He looked at her, his voice low but unshaken. "Then I die protecting something worth living for." The human stood at the doorway, the cold air biting his skin. Behind him, the widow and her children trembled near the fire. Before him, the villagers gathered like wolves, their eyes burning with hatred. Their leader stepped closer, his scarred face twisted with a cruel smile. "You will hand them over, outsider," the man growled. "The widow belongs to us. Her children belong to us. You are nothing but dirt beneath our feet. Do as you are told, or you will be crushed." The human's heart pounded. But his voice was steady. "She belongs to no one," he said, "and her children are not yours to claim. They are mine to protect now." A murmur rippled through the villagers. Some laughed, mocking him, others shouted curses, but the leader's face darkened, his anger boiling. He spat on the snow and raised his hand. "You dare defy us, human, you dare place yourself above your betters." The human stepped forward, his shoulders squared. For years he had bent under their cruelty, ignoring their insults, walking with his head down, but not anymore. Tonight, he was no longer just an outsider, he was a shield, and he would not move aside. The widow clutched her children tightly, her eyes filled with both fear and disbelief. She had expected him to hide, to tremble, but instead he stood taller than she had ever seen him. His voice was firm, his eyes like steel. The leader snarled and barked an order. 3 men stepped out from the crowd, their fists clenched, their weapons crude but deadly. They moved toward him with the confidence of hunters closing in on prey. The human's breath slowed. He reached for the wooden staff leaning against the doorframe. It was simple, worn from years of use, but strong. He gripped it tightly, feeling the weight settle into his hand. The first villager lunged, swinging a jagged blade. The human moved quickly, striking the man's arm with the staff. He blade clattered to the ground. The second rushed forward, but the human twisted and slammed the staff into his chest, sending him sprawling into the snow. The crowd erupted in shouts, their voices mixed with rage and disbelief. The outsider, the man they had mocked for so long, was fighting back, and winning. The leader's eyes narrowed, fury flashing in his scarred face. He pushed forward, his voice rising like a storm. "You cannot fight us all. Human, you are one, and we are many. Step aside, or you will be broken." The human's voice thundered across the frozen path. "I have lived in your shadows, I have carried your scorn, but tonight I stand. If you want her, if you want the children, you will have to go through me." Silence fell for a moment, broken only by the sound of the wind. The villagers stared at him, some with hate, others with doubt. The human's defiance shook them in a way no weapon could. For the first time, they saw not a weak outsider, but a man unafraid to bleed for what he chose to protect. The widow's eyes filled with tears, her hands pressed against her children's shoulders. She whispered to them, her voice trembling, "Do you see, he is not afraid, he stands for us." The leader growled, his pride wounded. He raised his weapon high, ready to charge. The villagers behind him roared, preparing to swarm. The human gripped his staff tighter, his muscles tense, his heart beat like a drum, not with fear, but with purpose. He was no longer alone, no longer just a shadow in their world. He had something to fight for, someone to protect, and as the first step of battle echoed in the snow, he knew one truth burned brighter than the fire in his home: this stand would decide everything. The frozen night exploded with shouts as the villagers surged forward, their boots crunched against the snow, their weapons glinting under the pale moonlight. The human tightened his grip on the wooden staff, planting his feet firmly on the ground. He was one man against many, but he would not take a step back. The first attacker lunged with a crude spear. The human sidestepped, swinging the staff in a sharp arc. The blow cracked against the man's ribs, sending him tumbling to the ground with a cry. Another rushed in with a heavy club, but the human lifted the staff to block the strike. The clash rang out like thunder. The human twisted, slamming the end of the staff into the attacker's jaw. The man crumpled to the snow. The villagers hesitated for a heartbeat, stunned by his strength. This was the outsider they had mocked, the weak man they had scorned, yet here he stood, fighting like a warrior. His eyes burned with a fire they could not extinguish. The leader roared in fury, pushing his men forward. "Do not fear him, he is only one. Break him, and the widow will be ours." 3 more charged at once, circling him. One swung low while another aimed high. The human ducked beneath the strike, thrusting the staff backward into the stomach of the second. The third raised a blade, but before it could fall, the human kicked his leg, sending him sprawling. Blood trickled down the human's arm where a blade had grazed him. The wound burned, but he ignored it. His breath came heavy, his chest rising and falling, yet in his heart, a steady rhythm beat louder than pain, the rhythm of purpose. Inside the shelter, the widow held her children close, her eyes were wide with terror, but beneath the fear was awe. She had expected him to fall, to be broken quickly by the mob, but instead, he stood unyielding, each strike of his staff echoing his defiance. Her son whispered, voice trembling, "Mother, he is fighting for us." Tears welled in her eyes as she stroked his hair. "Yes, my child, he is fighting for us." The battle raged on. The human moved with desperate strength, each motion fueled not by skill but by will. Every time he thought of retreat, he saw the children's faces, saw the widow's eyes filled with fear and hope, and he struck harder. But the villagers were many, their numbers pressed closer, surrounding him. His body grew heavy, his arms ached, his breaths turned ragged. Still, he did not stop. He could not stop. The leader stepped forward at last, his scarred face twisted with rage. He held a jagged axe, its edge gleaming cruelly. He pointed at the human and snarled, "You will die tonight, outsider, and when you fall, your fire dies with you." The human lifted his staff, blood dripping onto the snow. His voice, though tired, thundered through the cold, "If I die, I die as a man who chose to protect, not as a coward who bowed to cruelty." The leader charged, swinging the axe with brutal force. The human raised the staff, the clash echoing like a crack of thunder. The wood splintered under the blow, fragments scattering into the snow. The human staggered but did not fall. He dropped the broken staff and grabbed the leader's arm, driving his fist into the scarred man's jaw. The leader reeled back, stunned. The human tackled him into the snow, their struggle fierce. The villagers roared around them, some stepped forward, others hung back, uncertain. The sight of their leader on the ground shook them. For the first time, doubt spread in their ranks. The widow's heart raced as she whispered to herself, "Please, stand, human, please stand." With one final cry, the human drove the leader into the ground. His fist struck again and again until the axe slipped from the man's hand. The leader lay dazed, blood staining the snow. Islands fell over the crowd. The villagers stared at the outsider who had stood alone and broken their strongest man. The human rose slowly, his body battered, blood dripping from his wounds. He turned to face the mob, his voice steady despite the pain. "If you want her, if you want the children, then come take them. But know this, I will not stop fighting until I no longer draw breath." The villagers wavered, their courage cracked. One by one, they began to step back, fear creeping into their eyes. The outsider had proven stronger than their hatred. Inside the shelter, the widow's tears fell freely. She clutched her children to her chest and whispered, "He stood for us, he fought for us." The night grew still, the snow whispered against the ground, carrying away the echoes of battle. The human stood over the fallen leader, his breath heavy, his body trembling with exhaustion. Blood dripped from cuts on his arms and face, yet his eyes remained steady. The villagers watched in silence, their courage broken. For years they had called him weak, outsider, nothing. But tonight they saw a man who stood alone against many and did not fall. Their anger wavered, their certainty cracked. Some muttered curses under their breath, others turned their eyes away, ashamed of their cowardice. One by one, they began to retreat, their shadows fading into the storm. The human did not chase them, he simply stood tall, his chest rising and falling. His body screamed with pain, but his spirit did not bend. He had made his stand, and for once, it had been enough. Slowly, he turned back toward the small shelter, his steps heavy, each one leaving a dark trail in the snow. When he opened the door, warmth spilled over him. The widow rushed forward, her eyes wide with fear and hope. She caught his arm as he staggered, helping him toward the fire. Her children clung to him, their little hands clutching his coat. The boy's voice trembled as he whispered, "You won, didn't you? You beat them." The human managed a faint smile, his voice low. For now, the widow's eyes filled with tears as she pressed a cloth to his wounds. Her hands shook, but her touch was gentle. "You bled for us," she whispered. "You fought for us when no one else would." The human looked at her, his voice heavy with truth. "Because you matter, because they matter." He glanced at the children, their small faces lit by the fire. "And because no one deserves to be thrown into the cold to die." The widow lowered her head, tears falling onto her hands. She had been cast aside, broken, forced to beg, yet here was a man who had no reason to care, no reason to risk his life, and still he had stood for her, still he had chosen to fight. Her heart ached, but it also healed, piece by fragile piece. She reached out, placing her hand over his. Her voice trembled, yet carried a new strength. You are no longer an outsider, you are our protector, our family. The children nestled against him, their eyes closing with exhaustion. They no longer trembled, no longer feared the shadows outside. For the first time in their short lives, they felt safe. The human stared into the fire, his thoughts heavy but clear. He had lived so long with nothing, believing his days would fade into silence, but now, here in this small room, with this widow and her children beside him, he had something he thought he would never have again, a reason to live. The storm outside raged on, but within the walls of the shelter, a new world had begun, a world where kindness defied cruelty, where an outsider could become a shield, where a widow's plea for survival had turned into something far greater. That night, as the flames burned bright and the villagers' shouts faded into the distance, the widow leaned close, her voice soft against the crackle of fire. You are ours now, and we are yours. The human closed his eyes, pain still heavy in his body, but warmth spreading in his chest. For the first time in many years, he did not feel alone. He was no longer just a man surviving in the shadows, he was a father to children not his own. A partner to a woman who had lost everything, a warrior who had stood against cruelty, and as sleep finally claimed him, one truth echoed in his heart: the knock at midnight had not only changed their lives, it had given him a new beginning.